As the summer sun rose higher in the sky, the Greenhill Heights neighborhood gradually came to life. It was a peaceful area with clean streets flanked by rows of maple trees. Despite its somewhat fancy name, Greenhill Heights was not a particularly wealthy suburb. It was mostly a middle-class community, where adults went to work, children biked to school, and an occasional shiny car passed by. Some retired couples also chose to settle here to enjoy a serene environment and fresh air. Most houses in Greenhill Heights were single-story homes or bungalows with small front and backyards. In the summer, residents typically decorated their gardens with colorful flowers. One might see tropical plants like hibiscus or decorative palms, interspersed with imported blossoms. Early in the morning, the air smelled of freshly cut grass, and birds chirped on every branch. Children rode their bikes, occasionally stopping at someone's gate to challenge each other to basketball or invent mischievous games. Beneath this seemingly perfect veneer, however, lay underlying tensions and biases that many preferred to overlook. And our story begins at house number 18, where Darius recently fulfilled a lifelong dream, building a private swimming pool in his backyard. Darius Matthews was an African-American man in his early 30s. Tall and well-built from regular exercise, particularly swimming, he kept his hair neatly trimmed and had bright, enthusiastic eyes. He grew up in a working-class family in the city and had faced many challenges to pursue his education and eventually land a good job in the hospitality management industry. Darius managed to buy his house in Greenhill Heights after years of relentless effort, saving every penny he could. His home wasn't grand, but it was cozy and well-maintained, boasting a spacious backyard. Recently, he'd completed the construction of a swimming pool, a dream he'd harbored since childhood. The pool was lined with shimmering blue mosaic tiles, glistening under the summer sun. A stone walkway encircled the water, and clusters of iris and small sunflowers grew near the edges. In one corner of the yard, Darius had set up a wooden table and chairs under a large umbrella, perfect for a small barbecue party with friends or for quiet moments reading and sipping drinks. Every morning before work, Darius took a few minutes to admire his masterpiece. He'd close his eyes, inhale the fresh air, and enjoy the scents of grass and flowers. In these tranquil moments, he felt all his worries dissolve, replaced by pride in making his dream a reality. More than once, he reminded himself, life can be tough, but if you persevere, you can achieve anything. But his peace of mind wouldn't last long. Behind the neighborly smiles and polite greetings of Greenhill Heights lurked hidden tensions. Magda, the woman living at house number 22 on the same street, personified the worst of prejudice, arrogance, and interference in other people's lives. Magda Whitaker was a white woman in her early 50s. She lived alone, rumored to be widowed, though some said her husband had left because he couldn't endure her meddlesome and judgmental nature. Magda came from a well-off family and had enjoyed substantial material comfort. When she moved to Greenhill Heights, she tried to keep up an image of a refined, sophisticated lady. Whether walking the neighborhood or popping into local shops, Magda always appeared in designer clothing, pastel-colored suits, floral dresses, or elegantly tailored outfits. In the summer, she liked to wear wide-brimmed hats, big sunglasses, and strong perfume, more suited to a beach resort than a suburban street. From the day Darius moved in, Magda watched him with thinly veiled disapproval. Initially, she was civil enough not to confront him directly but dropped plenty of hints about her discontent regarding his background and race. At neighborhood gatherings, Magda would smirk and remark, "Oh, it's so nice to have a bit more variety around here," in a tone that left no doubt about her intent. Each time Darius passed Magda's front yard, he heard her hushed complaints, insinuating that property values would decline. At first, he tried to ignore it. After all, he'd met plenty of prejudiced people like Magda. He chose to focus on his job, on living his life. Confronting someone unwilling to change seemed pointless. But her behavior grew worse. Magda didn't just make snide remarks, she believed she had the right to say who deserved amenities like a private pool. In her eyes, Darius, a black man, was utterly unfit to own something so luxurious. Her prejudice festered, and Darius found himself enduring daily insults, determined to keep the peace until an incident on a sweltering afternoon would push him over the edge. That Saturday was unusually hot. The sun scorched everything in sight. Everyone wanted to cool down or stay indoors. Darius had just finished an exhausting workweek and longed to return home to dive into the cool water of his pool to wash away his stress. But when he stepped into his backyard, he froze in disbelief. Magda was sitting by the pool. She wore a pale pink one-piece swimsuit under a sheer cover-up, her large sun hat angled just so. A glass of orange juice sat on his wooden table, and she reclined as if she owned the place. Darius blinked, suspecting a mirage. But no, this was real. Magda had trespassed into his locked backyard. He often left the side gate latched but not fully locked, expecting a landscaper's visit. Clearly, Magda had taken advantage of that. Even more shocking was her reaction when she noticed him. Instead of showing embarrassment or remorse, she arched an eyebrow and grinned in challenge. "Ah, you finally appear. I've been waiting for you to step away so I could enjoy this pool. It's scorching." Her flippant tone made Darius's jaw tighten. Crossing his arms, he tried to remain calm. "Magda, you have no right to be here. This is my private property." She waved him off, lips curling into a snide smile. "Come on, Darius. I'm just borrowing a bit of water. Besides, someone like you doesn't really need something so extravagant. A pool? Isn't that just for show?" Her words hit hard. Someone like you. The racial subtext was clear, and while Darius was used to hearing it, it stung each time. He inhaled, trying to keep his composure. "I'm asking you to leave. I don't want to escalate this." But Magda ignored him. She flipped her hair, pointing a finger in his face. "Don't think having this pool lets you boss me around. You don't own the entire neighborhood. Now get lost and let me relax." Darius felt his anger simmer. He had endured her slurs for too long. She'd barged into his private space, dismissing him with blatant contempt. He realized he had to do something. Magda needed a lesson in boundaries. Darius stepped back, weighing his options. He could call the police to report trespassing. But he didn't want a big scene. He knew how someone like Magda could twist the narrative to play the victim. He'd seen such scenarios on the news where the real victim was wrongly accused in the end. Then a bold solution struck him: itchy powder. He recalled a harmless but potent prank item from his college days, an irritant that caused intense itching. A friend once used it in a dorm prank. Darius still had a small container stashed away in a drawer, kept more as a humorous memento than anything else. What if I just sprinkle a bit into the pool? He wondered. Magda would have no choice but to leave. Maintaining a calm front, Darius feigned compliance with her demand for privacy, saying he would change into his swimsuit. Satisfied, Magda went back to her phone, slipping onto a white float and dozing. Earphones in, like she was on holiday. Inside, Darius quickly found the old container of itchy powder. He hesitated momentarily. This was not something he normally did. Yet Magda's relentless hostility was pushing him to the brink. Finally, he took the small container and stepped back outside, discreetly staying at a corner of the pool out of Magda's view. With a flick of his wrist, he sprinkled just enough powder into the water. It dissolved quickly, leaving no visible trace. Darius sat down on a chair by the pool, waiting. At first, Magda remained blissfully unaware, floating on her inflatable. But within minutes, she began shifting around, scratching her neck and arms. Perhaps she assumed at first it was a mosquito bite or two. Suddenly, the itching spread across her body. "Ow, what the?" she muttered. Eyes widening. She scrambled upright, flipping the float aside in the shallow end. Raking her nails over her shoulders, down her arms and torso, she looked increasingly distressed. Within seconds, red blotches emerged on her skin. "What's happening?" she shrieked. Darius feigned concern, standing up and casting a supposedly puzzled glance in her direction. He had anticipated this moment, though witnessing it still made him suppress a smirk. "Darius," she screamed. "What have you done to your pool? I'm itching like crazy." He shrugged, keeping his tone even. "Could be an allergic reaction to the chlorine. I did warn you to stay out of my pool." This only infuriated Magda. She clambered out, dripping water, scratching wildly as she knocked over her glass of orange juice. The lounge chair went askew. Darius turned slightly away to hide his amusement. But the real spectacle was yet to come. Magda stared in horror at the spreading red rashes. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, shouting into the receiver. "Help! I've been attacked. He poisoned the pool. I'm dying of this itch." Darius stiffened at her exaggeration. Poison? He knew itchy powder wasn't lethal, merely extremely irritating. But Magda was clearly set on dramatizing the event. Barely 10 minutes passed before a police cruiser pulled up. Siren blaring. A few curious neighbors peered out their windows. 2 officers stepped out, Officer Grant, a tall young man, and Sergeant Reed, a more serious-looking woman in her 40s. Magda rushed at them, oblivious to her soaked swimsuit and scratched, blotchy skin. "Arrest him. He's trying to kill me. He put some toxic substance in his pool." Officer Grant frowned. "Calm down, ma'am. We need the full story." Meanwhile, Sergeant Reed approached Darius. He stood calmly, though still on guard. Reed asked, "Sir, can you tell me what's going on?" Darius sighed. "Magda trespassed into my yard. I asked her to leave, but she refused. She kept insulting me and insisted on using my pool. I've done nothing to harm her." Magda glared, pointing furiously at Darius. "He's lying. He set me up. I'm going to sue him." Officer Grant tried to get both sides separately. After hearing Darius's account, his background of being harassed by Magda's racial slurs and her repeated intrusions, Grant began to form a clearer picture. "So she came onto your property without permission?" Darius nodded, adding, "She's been doing it for days, taunting me because of my race, acting like I have no right to own anything here. I told her to leave, she wouldn't listen." Meanwhile, Sergeant Reed questioned Magda, who ranted, "This is Greenhill Heights. We don't need his kind here. He used some chemical in his pool to kill me. It's obviously malicious." Reed eyed the red welts, recognizing them more as a reaction to an irritant than any lethal substance. She pressed, "Did you see Mr. Darius do anything unusual with the water? Were there any odd smells or colors?" Magda shook her head, stumbling over her words. "No, but I know he's plotting against me." Reed responded coolly. "We don't have concrete evidence of that. You've also admitted you entered his yard without invitation. We'll need to investigate further." Sensing the officer's doubts, Magda grew more agitated. Her rage flared as she scratched incessantly. She could feel the neighbors watching from behind windows and fences. Officer Grant turned to Darius to clarify details, and at that moment, Magda lunged forward, shouting, "You're siding with him just because he's black? I'll deal with him myself." With that, she swung a fist at Darius, connecting with his cheek. It wasn't a particularly forceful blow, but enough to make him stumble back. Immediately, Officer Grant and Sergeant Reed intervened. Grant restrained Magda while Reed swiftly cuffed her. "Ma'am," Sergeant Reed said sternly, "that was assault. You are under arrest." Magda flailed, screaming, "Let me go. He deserves it. He. But her protests fell on deaf ears. She had attacked Darius in front of the police. Neighbors who had quietly gathered looked on, whispering. Many had known of her rude behavior but were still shocked at her resorting to violence so openly. After they subdued her, Officer Grant led Magda to the patrol car. She kept howling accusations, half crazed by both the itch and her fury. In that moment, the facade of a refined lady shattered, revealing a raging, out-of-control woman. Sergeant Reed turned to Darius with an apologetic expression. "We'll proceed with a formal investigation. Meanwhile, she's being charged with assault and trespassing. If you want to file charges or request a restraining order, we can help." Darius rubbed his cheek where he'd been struck, nodding. He was shaken yet oddly relieved, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. With Magda escorted away, the small crowd of onlookers dispersed. A couple of friendly neighbors, Mr. Martin and Ms. Sarah, stepped up to check on Darius. Mr. Martin, an older Italian man, patted Darius's shoulder. "You all right, son? We saw it all. That woman's been out of line for ages." Ms. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, shook her head. "I never liked her. But I never thought she'd assault you. Disgusting." Darius thanked them for their concern. Their support was comforting, reminding him that Greenhill Heights wasn't all bad. Some neighbors were genuinely kind and willing to speak up for justice. News of Magda's arrest spread like wildfire. She had always been known for her abrasive manner. Now, her reputation plummeted even further. Some residents claimed she'd have to pay a hefty fine or possibly face court proceedings. Others speculated she might sell her house and leave the area in disgrace. Regardless of the ultimate outcome, people realized Magda had destroyed her own credibility. A self-proclaimed, classy individual had been revealed as aggressive and boorish. Meanwhile, Darius received many messages of solidarity. One evening, he found a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Clayton, an elderly couple living at the end of the street. In the note, they apologized for not intervening sooner and commended him for his patience. They respected how calmly he had handled Magda's harassment. Darius occasionally reflected on his itchy powder prank. He wondered if it was too cruel. He hadn't wanted to become petty. Still, he acknowledged that if he hadn't done something, Magda might have continued trespassing and disrespecting him. In truth, it felt like a well-deserved lesson. That night, Darius stretched out on a lounger by his pool, gazing at the starry sky. His thoughts swirled with lingering emotions. He had moved to Greenhill Heights dreaming of a safe, comfortable haven after his demanding workdays. Instead, he'd encountered bigotry from a neighbor who refused to see him as an equal. Yet, through this ordeal, Darius realized he wasn't alone. Neighbors like Mr. Martin, Ms. Sarah, the Claytons, and others stood by him. He also learned a lesson about confronting injustice. Others in his community might also have suffered under prejudice, but fear or a desire for peace often kept them silent. He thought of his parents and grandparents, those who'd lived in far more oppressive times. He felt a surge of pride. "I owe it to them and to myself to take a stand," he thought. "We can't let bullying or discrimination go unchallenged." A few days later, Darius received a call from Min, his close friend from college who now worked as a chef at a 5-star restaurant in a nearby city. Min had heard about the incident with Magda and decided to visit. That afternoon, Min arrived in an old car and greeted Darius enthusiastically. He had a youthful, scholarly look, jeans, a plain t-shirt, a stark contrast to Magda's gaudy style, and carried a bag he called a special gift. After hearing the full story, Min chuckled. So, you used itchy powder? I remember that from our dorm days. Never imagined you'd use it on a neighbor. Darius shrugged. I didn't want to. But she pushed me too far. Min patted his friend on the back. I get it. Glad it's over. Now let's celebrate the freedom of your pool. That's why I brought this. He reached into the bag and pulled out a jar of seasoning and a bottle of marinade he had concocted himself. Tonight, let's fire up the grill in your backyard. Invite some good neighbors over and reclaim your space. Sort of a purification after all the tension. Darius had long wanted to host a small party. He agreed immediately. The next afternoon, Darius and Min busied themselves setting up the yard. They moved tables, hung string lights, arranged trays of food and drinks. Darius knocked on a few neighbors' doors, Mr. Martin, Miss Sarah, the Claytons, and a young couple at house number 20. All were eager to join in, no one refusing a free barbecue on a balmy evening. Soon, the guests trickled in. The fragrance of grilled meat mingled with laughter under the warm glow of the setting sun. Darius's pool shimmered under the ambient lighting, the focal point of the party. Ms. Sarah marveled. Your pool is gorgeous. I've never really looked at it up close. It's definitely worth the hard work. Mr. Martin took a sip of beer, smiling. Indeed. Darius, you remind us that if you work hard, anyone can earn nice things. Though Magda's name remained the unspoken elephant in the room. No one dwelled on the recent scandal. Instead, they praised Min's marinade, discussed the weather, vacation plans, and sports updates. As Darius scanned the gathering, he felt overwhelming gratitude. Warmth and community outshone bigotry that night. The sky grew dark, but the backyard at house number 18 stayed bright with conversation and camaraderie. When the celebration wound down, Darius and Min lingered by the pool, their feet dangling in the cool water. Min asked quietly. So what if Magda comes back? I hear she might face a fine or some legal restrictions. Darius was silent for a moment before shaking his head. I don't intend to escalate anything further. If she returns and behaves the same way, I'll call the police. But honestly, I hope she learns a lesson. Living peacefully is better than harboring hate. Min nodded. I'll leave it to you. Let's hope it all settles down. The patio light shimmered on the ripples in the pool. Darius inhaled the gentle night breeze, pondering the days to come. This incident had reaffirmed something important. Racism and bias still lingered, but how one responds to them was critical. Sometimes one must stand firm for what is right, even if it brings complications. And sometimes, it's worth hoping those who err might change. Greenhill Heights was still the place Darius called home. Life here wasn't perfect, but neither was it devoid of kindness and empathy. Magda's theatrics served as a warning to any would-be bully, highlighting that there are consequences to harassment. It also left a lesson: to command respect, one must stand up for oneself instead of continually retreating. Under the night sky, Darius smiled. Tomorrow he would return to his routine, going to work, caring for his home, greeting his neighbors. Maybe one day, Magda might show remorse or at least learn to coexist. Meanwhile, he would continue relishing his private oasis, his sparkling pool, a dream he had realized through his own sweat and determination.